to the video. So I thought I'd do another video talking about these lenses here. Now we have a black 800mm prime STM f11 lens versus the 200 to 800 f9 zoom lens, 200 to 800mm. Both are image stabilized. Both of them do a good job in terms of their reach, max focal length obviously being 800, and it's always going to be 800 on the prime. It does not change. You zoom with your feet versus the 200 to 800 which you zoom with the zoom ring. However, basically we've got an f11 lens here versus a USM f9 lens. You know, the versatility of zoom is you can zoom it in and out, but the prime you've stuck with it being 800 and you have to zoom with your feet. However, what you find is image quality can vary from lens to lens, and I've been wondering which is sharper. So I've got both lenses here to do an indoor test. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, just to give you an idea on distance, we'll just go over to the camera and the lens, and let's just have a look at what 200mm looks like on here. So hopefully you can see that. So if we go and zoom in, you can get an idea of the zoom. Right, in this segment I just want to address image quality on the RF 800 f11 lens versus the 200 to 800 f9 lens. Let's see if we can compare apples to apples. One thing you need to remember is that the minimum focus of the RF 800 f11 lens is 6 meters, where it's between 1.2 and 3 meters depending on what focal length you're at on the 200 to 800. But I don't think anyone's addressed the image quality. So we've got diffractive optics on the 800 RF lens versus obviously clear glass on the 200 to 800. The main difference between normal glass and diffractive optics is diffractive optics is basically a formula Canon's come up with to make lenses lighter. I've done a video on this on my channel, so go and check that out. I'll put a link in the description box if you want to work out what's the difference. But essentially, diffractive optics is cheaper glass versus normal solid glass like L glasses. Anyway, without further ado, let's have a look at the images. I've got a bunch of images here for you to have a look at. We're going to look at a test chart images first, and then some other real world images. I've got it all set up in my living room. We're just over 6 meters away, and I wanted to have a look at sharpness basically of what the lenses can do. So without further ado, let's zoom in at into the center at 100%. So this is the 800 RF lens. Looks quite nice in the center. So let's have a look at how the image quality holds up on the 200 to 800, and let's zoom in there at 100%. So let's have a look and compare the sharpness. So obviously that's the 200 to 800 and that's the 800. Looking at both images, they look nice and clear. I can't really tell a major difference as such. So let's just go down into the corner. Sometimes that gives us more of a indication on the quality. That's 200 to 800. Let's do the same with the prime lens. So we're looking at the corner here to see if there's any major difference. If I'm looking at both images, they're pretty much on par with each other. You might give a slight edge to the prime, but you've got to remember that the 200 to 800 isn't its strongest at 800mm. Now that needs to be a bit of a caveat with that, because I don't think the 200 to 800 is a true 200 to 800 zoom lens. I think it's closer to 780mm, because when you compare the images in the other examples I have, you'll be able to see that there is a big difference. So again, this is the 800mm lens, and I do want to have a look at the center. So let's just line up the images so we can have a look in the center at 200%. So that's the 200 to 800, and this is the 800mm, and we can tell quite a lot of good information when we zoom in up to 200%. I think once you go beyond 200%, you're really pixel peeping, and I don't think it's really beneficial for you to do that. But we want to find out which is the sharper. If I'm honest with you, I think they're on par with each other. I don't really think one is better than the other looking at these images. If you were to give it a slight edge, I'd probably say the 800 f11 lens is slightly sharper. Remember, all these images are at ISO 5000, aperture f11. Obviously the f11 prime lens can't change aperture, but I wanted to judge it by apples to apples. But both images are rendering good results. So that's the 200 to 800, and that's the 800. Both of them very good images. If I'm honest with you, I think they're as good as each other. Let's move on. Okay, so we have a nice bear that I thought I'd take a picture of. So this is again the 800 f11 lens. Looks nice. Let's have a look at the 200 to 800. Now, unfortunately, I seem to have a bit of a yellow tinge here. Not sure if that was user error, so I do forgive that a little. It's possible I may have had some other lighting on at the time as well. If you're wondering about shutter speed, it's basically between 40 and 80 frames per second, and I was using a 10-second timer on a tripod and it was with image stabilization on as well on both lenses. So this gives you a good representation on the quality of both lenses. So this is the 200 to 800, as I've said. This is the 800 RF lens. So basically, you're not going to be judging the corners in these lenses, if I'm really honest with you. So let's zoom in to the center by 100% on the 800. Let's do the same on the 200 to 800. Now there are slight differences in, obviously you can tell that it's slightly bigger on the RF 800. I don't think this has been discussed at all. Now if you guys remember the days of the 100 to 400 EF Mark II, I did many videos on that lens, where I basically come to the assumption it was more of a 350mm lens rather than 400mm lens, and I think the same is going on here. I don't think the 200 to 800 is a true 800mm zoom lens, because you can see there's a slight difference in framing. So obviously at 100%, you can tell the 800 RF prime lens looks bigger in the frame than the 200 to 800. Now let's see if we can zoom in a little bit more. Unfortunately I've zoomed too much, so let's zoom out. But I think both images are very, very good and sharp. I can't really say one is sharper than the other, if I'm honest with you. As you can see, there's a bit of dust on the eye here that is being clearly picked up by both lenses. So that's the 200 to 800, and that is the 800 RF lens. Let's see if we can zoom in at 200% here. Again, it's quite sharp there. I think we might be too much in there. So that's the 800 RF prime, and that's the zoom. So there is a difference, but not a vast difference. It's very, very close. I really can't say which is the better. It's up to you to make your mind up. I don't want to tell you which is better and which you should get. For me, the versatility of the zoom lens makes it a better lens, but it's up to you to make your decision on which you think is the better lens. So let's move on to some more images. So here we have a can of Fanta on the table. Again, some distance away on both lenses. So this is the 800 prime, and it looks nice and sharp and crisp. And I think we're blessed by the quality of lenses that we are getting at the moment. So again, that's the 800 RF prime. Here's the zoom. I tried to get the framing as close as possible to each other as I could, and you can see that both images look nice. So that's the 200 to 800, 61.3%, and that's the 800 RF lens. Again, you can see the framing is a bit more tighter on the actual 800 lens. I think contrast is well controlled in both lenses, and to be honest with you, if you've not seen my video where I compared the 100 to 400 Mark II with a 2x extender, the EF lens versus the 800 prime, I encourage you to watch it. Again, very similar results. I think really we're really nitpicking at these lenses when it comes to checking for image quality. Now, I've noticed a lot of people do real world examples, and they try and give you an idea of what the two lenses can do, but I think you really need to do an controlled environment video indoors to find out which is the better lens, because you can control your environment, you can photograph the same thing, and you can see which is sharper. But I really don't think that you would have any complaints about either lens. Again, this is the 800 prime, and this is the zoom lens. Both look very sharp and very nice. I'm impressed with both lenses, if I'm honest with you. That's the 200 to 800, 800 prime. Again, very good imagery. Let's see, have we got it approximately the same? No, not quite. Again, too much there. But let's zoom in a bit more on this. So 66.7%. We'll need to zoom out a little bit on this. If we've got it comparable there. So that's the 800 prime, and that's the zoom. Very, 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 very similar. See if we can move it a bit more over. Maybe it can give you a better idea. But yeah, both images are really good. But let's go to the extreme, and let's zoom in a bit more on the center here. So we're 100% there, 100% there. Again, obviously you can see the can in the shot of the 200 to 800. But again, this is what I'm trying to say is the 800 prime is an 800mm lens. The 200 to 800 is not. In fact, I don't think 20mm is enough in terms of my assumptions, and it could be closer to 750mm if I'm honest. But again, that's the 800 f11 prime lens, and that is the 200 to 800. Let's see if we can go to 200% in the irresistible taste section here. But at this point, you can see the 5000 ISO. So keep that in mind here. Let's zoom in at 200% here as well. So that's the 800 prime, and that's the zoom. Can you tell the difference? It's very, very minor. If I'm honest, I might give a slight edge to the prime, but it's so close. I don't think you could really say which is the sharper lens from these images. Anyway, so I have one more image to show you, which is a lens that I own. This is a 300 2.8 EF lens that I'm thinking of getting rid of because I don't use it that often, but I thought we'd have a look. So this is the 800 prime again. Let's compare it to the 200 to 800, and you can see more of the lens from this angle. So obviously you can tell that we've got more of the bottom part here in shot. When we go back to the 800, it's tighter in. So I would say my assumption there on the 200 800 not being a true 800mm lens is probably pretty fair to say. So in this shot you can see there's lots of good detail, lots of good contrast. I think both images are pretty much on par with each other. I think they're very, very close to each other. I think these two lenses are so close to each other in quality. I don't think you would be disappointed with either of the lens. So this video isn't about telling you which is the better lens. This is just to show you the lens quality you will get from both lenses. So let's go into a bit more detail on zooming in and have a look at the quality, as we would call it, pixel peeping. Again, if you're wondering what camera I'm on the Canon R6 Mark II, a 24 megapixel camera, ISO 5000, which this camera can easily handle, and shutter speeds at this point, I believe we were at our own 25th of a second, because a lot of light was being reflected off the whiteness of the lens, giving us a higher shutter speed. So basically, if you photograph anything that's bright, it gives you a higher shutter speed. So looking at this particular image, it looks nice and sharp. Let's zoom in into 100% on the 800 prime, and let's do the same on the 200 to 800. Again, looks nice detail. You can actually see the whiteness of the paint coming through, the texture, and it looks nice and sharp. So that's the 200 to 800, and this is the 800 prime. Again, looks very good in terms of detail. I really struggle to see if there is a better lens, which is the better lens, sorry, in terms of quality. I don't think you're going to be disappointed with either of these lenses. I really like them. The thing where the 200 to 800 comes into its own is obviously it's a zoom, and it allows you to get different compositions than you can with an 800. The one key thing that I'm not happy about is the minimum focus on the RF 800 f11 lens. So keep that in mind whenever you're looking for a lens. A minimum focus helps you out a lot, especially if animals come close to you. So we're at 100%. Obviously you can see that it's good detail on the lens. That this picture that we've taken looks nice and sharp and crisp. Let's have a look at the 200 to 800 again. Lots of detail there, no major problems at all. I like it. So let's zoom into 200%, see if we can make any difference out in the text itself. Again, you are seeing a bit of that 5000 ISO here, but again, good detail on the 200 to 800. Let's do the same on the 800 prime lens. Good detail. I know we're looking upside down, so I do apologise for that. But it looks nice and crisp. The L looks well clear. No major problems there. So I'll look at the 200 to 800. It seems to be slightly less clear than the 800 prime, but you can make out the screws here quite easily. Let's go back to the 800 prime. Very, very similar. We're at 200%, and I know this is a bit daft in terms of extremes, but let's go to 300%. Do the same on the 200 to 800. Obviously it's a bit more zoomed in on the 800 here, as you can see. Maybe if I zoom in a bit more, 400%. Go back to the 800 at about 300%. So we've got a bit more of a difference, but I really don't think anyone's going to be disappointed with the image quality on both of these lenses. I really struggle to say which is the better. Practicalities, obviously a zoom allows you to zoom in and out, and a prime doesn't. The minimum focus of 6 meters on the prime versus 1.2 to 3 meters, depending on your subject matter, on the zoom. It's up to you to make your mind up. But again, both lenses are giving us a good showing. I may do a comparison of the 100 to 500 with the 1.4 extender, 700mm, versus these two lenses with these same pictures. If you would like to see that comparison, please do make a comment in the comments box and let me know if you'd like to see that video. But there you go. It's a good showing from both lenses. Hello everyone. So, in conclusion to the video, I struggle to find a main difference with these two lenses in terms of image quality. Now, I did compare the 600 RF 11 prime lens with the Sigma 150 to 600, and I did determine that that was a bit sharper. However, saying that, I think these lenses will be sufficient for most people's uses. The only thing I think is a big sticking point for me was the focus box on the R6, the original R6. However, the R6 Mark II changed that a little bit, where the focus box became a bit bigger and it made it more usable. The same was true of the R5 Mark II. So any new camera will take advantage of that technology where the focus box is a lot bigger, and that was the main disadvantage with the RF prime f11 lenses. However, that being said, I still think the better lens is probably the 200 to 800 zoom, for its versatility of being able to zoom and its minimum focus being a lot better. In terms of image quality, I really struggle to separate these two apart. Now, I'm going to be doing another video at some point where I'll be comparing the 100 to 500 with 1.4 extender, and we'll try and compare image quality at 700mm, but we'll have to obviously reframe everything. But I do think both lenses are valid and useful in the field. Now, a lot of YouTubers have done videos comparing images of birds, but not the same subject matter, not in the same pose. It's very difficult to compare two lenses, apples to apples, if your images are different. Now, I appreciate it's very difficult in the real world to do that. That's why you've got to come indoors and do lens test charts and test images of the same thing to find out which is better, because you need apples to apples to judge that. So both images that I've been taking with both lenses have been at ISO 5000, shutter speed ranging between 40 and 80th of a second, with image stabilization on, just over 6 meters distance from the camera. But what I did notice is the 200 to 800 isn't a true 200 to 800 lens. I don't think anyone's been talking about this either. I would probably say it's between 780 to 750 millimeters. Very similar to what happened with the 100 to 400 EF Mark II lens. That again, where other YouTubers have done testing, and I did the same test myself, and yeah, I totally agreed with them on that point. That it wasn't a true 400mm lens, just like I don't think this is a true 200 to 800mm lens. Don't get me wrong, I think 750mm is more than enough for most people. Just remember, if you want to get sharp images with zoom lenses, getting closer is key. Remember, the atmosphere is working against you, so you'll always get thermal temperatures interfering with your pictures. And not only that, take note when you do take your lens outside that it's gone from a warm environment to a cold, that you'll get your lens fogging up, and you need to allow your lenses to normalize in temperature. That's why some of you guys will buy a lens like this, go out on the field and think my lens is not sharp. It's not. You just need to allow it to adjust to the temperature, and that can take some hours. Anyway, hopefully you found this video very interesting and informative to figure out which is sharper. I honestly believe both lenses are as good as each other. Now, from what I know, that the 200 to 800 becomes a bit more sharper at 700mm. So if that's the case, you might say the 200 to 800 is a tad bit sharper once you zoom back a little bit. But we're judging apples to apples. That's 800 versus 800. So I just think they're as good as each other when it comes to sharpness. But as for versatility, the zoom wins. The zoom wins for its minimum focus. It's a slightly bigger lens as well, so that might be the advantage of this, because this can actually condense a little bit, because obviously you can unlock it and make it a bit smaller, and you can't do that with the 200 to 800. It's still quite a bigger lens. Hopefully you can see that. Anyway, ladies and gentlemen, hopefully you find this video informative. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye bye.
Forest, looking for some exciting images of birds. Let's just see what we can get.